This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Alrighty, welcome to episode 85 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we are joined by the co-host of Maggie and Perloff on the Infinity Sports Network, a former Danette. He is also a better free throw shooter than Doug Gottlieb. He is a Philadelphia Eagles fan. He is Andrew Perloff. Andrew, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. And I asked this to start as a Jets fan who has no idea what it feels like. How does going to the Super Bowl feel after already winning one? Like, are the nerves and the passion still the same? Is the urgency still there?
Well, Brandon, you can squint and see green and imagine like the Jets are there and sort of cosplay. I have to be honest, talked about it on the show today. The urgency is different. So my co-host, Maggie Gray, is a lifelong Buffalo Bills fan. Her urgency on Sunday night was you could cut it with a knife.
Yeah.
It's not the same. We got the ring. We were there 2 years ago. And, you know, a part of it, too, is I didn't expect the Eagles to be here this year. Feels a little bit like house money, just a little bit. So, yes, there's a lot of pressure. And if they lose in dramatic fashion to Mahomes, it'll be crushing, totally crushing. But coming into this, I don't have the nerves.
At what point this season did you start to think that they could be a Super Bowl team?
I would say when they went up by 17 points against the Commanders. No, I'm going to be fully honest here. I didn't really believe in the team. I think the playoff field had to play out the right way. I think the snow against the Rams helped because I think the Rams were an outstanding team. And going to Detroit would have been a coin toss. So I would say halfway through the season, I was like, this defense is much better than I expected. They could do some things this year. But I think, and I still think coming into this playoffs, it wasn't a done deal. Like they needed things to play out the right way. Because I thought the Rams were really dangerous. Going to Detroit would have been interesting. You never know what that Detroit team's going to be. So I really wasn't convinced, I'm being totally honest, until they really jumped all over Washington.
How do Eagles fans feel about Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni?
From what I could tell, it's really hard to sell them on Jalen Hurts. I'm on several. I live in New York, connected to Philly. I'm on several Eagles text threads. I get a lot of he holds on to the ball too long. He's not consistent enough. He shut up a lot of people with the game on Sunday. I have so many Jalen Hurts haters. There's a tradition in Philly to hate the starting quarterback. It goes back. They hated Ron Jaworski, hated Randall Cunningham, couldn't stand Donovan McNabb. I'm telling you, there were so many of my friends who didn't like McNabb, and he was awesome. They always like the backup, like they always like Bubby Brister and Kevin Cobb until they start, and then they don't like him. So I would say Hurts is not popular. In my sense, he's not as popular as you'd expect a starting quarterback who's been in the Super Bowl. Sirianni, he's growing on people. You can't ignore the record. It's pretty fantastic. It's hot and cold too, depending on. That's very much how the team's doing. When he loses, he looks bad. When he wins, it feels awesome.
So from your perspective, is Jalen Hurts, is he overrated? Is he underrated? Because like I see people in the media who just point to 2 Super Bowls in 3 years, and then you see others that make it seem like he throws the football the way Tim Tebow did.
I think he is underrated because I think that Jalen Hurts in the Super Bowl in Glendale against the Chiefs, that Jalen Hurts is in there. I thought the year coming to that, he had a much better season the year before. The team was not good around him. I saw signs. Then he was awesome. Now, what they've done the last couple years is that's a function of coaching. He could probably throw 35 touchdowns if he wanted to. So I think he's underrated. I think he can battle with any quarterback in the league. Now, is he going to do it consistently? Probably not. He's probably not as consistent as a Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. I put him a notch below, but he's not that far below. His ceiling is high. I'll be honest, what frustrated me about him was last year, after he got the big contract, he didn't want to run. He had this big knee brace. If it was the injury, he should have said it was the injury. But there were so many plays where he would be one-on-one with a linebacker in the flat, and he'd either just go down or he'd go for 2 yards. And it really hurt them in the second half of the season. I think it might have been injuries. So sometimes I wonder, is he lying to us about health? Because a slightly injured Jalen Hurts is not nearly as good.
How do Eagles fans feel about Andy Reid? Is there
love?
No,
there any
no,
other option with Andy Reid?
No, like seller's
No.
remorse seeing him. I mean, and maybe it helps because you guys have already since won a Super Bowl. Maybe it would it feel different, do you think, if you didn't have a Super Bowl and
Yeah.
you're watching him winning all these with the Chiefs?
Yeah, I think so. Doug Peterson getting that Super Bowl made it okay to embrace Andy Reid again. Andy Reid was a class act for a long time in Philadelphia. I think he is very well thought of. I think highly of him. I think people inside that building in Philadelphia still like Andy Reid. And that's how you judge a person. Like, what impact did he have on his coworkers? It seems incredibly positive. I think it permeated through the city. I'd be surprised if there are any Andy Reid haters. I think everybody likes him. I mean, not love him like they used to, but I think it's a very positive rating for Andy Reid.
As a national radio host, do you get the feeling that people are chiefed out?
Oh my God, that's the understatement of the year. They hate the Chiefs. You can't walk anywhere in my building without someone saying, "Gosh, I'm so sick of the Chiefs." I think people were really, really pulling for the Buffalo Bills. Less so for the Eagles because nobody likes the Eagles because they're brash. But I think that it's an incredible thing. Neutral fans are rooting for the Eagles who never would because they are so tired of the Chiefs. And we're hearing all these reasons for not liking the Chiefs. I just think it's fatigue. I think just people are sick of seeing the same team doing again and again. And the way they win is so close. So many football fans I know want to end. We have a lot of callers who don't like it. Our executive producer hates the Chiefs more than he's hated any other team, which is so unlikely to me because they're not a hateable team. Now, the Dallas Cowboys, that's a hateable team, not this Chiefs team. So I don't really get it, but it's out there.
Yeah, I think like people, they hate them, they're tired of them, but I think they also enjoy the fact that here they are now, that they have a reason to root in the Super Bowl, like other than just betting or anything like that. Like the Chiefs being in the Super Bowl gives casual fans a natural rooting interest because they dislike them, and I think that's ultimately a good thing.
Well, aren't the predictions it's going to be the highest rated Super Bowl ever? I don't know if these ratings are all accurate. Last year, I think it was partly Taylor Swift, but you're right. The dynasty helps because you can root against a team.
Yeah.
Parity is great for the NFL because everybody gets into it. But I agree. I think this powerhouse makes it must-see TV. I think that probably the Eagles are an okay draw for the Super Bowl, but it doesn't matter. Anybody playing the Chiefs is going to just be the game. I think it's going to be like history. I think people are going to want to tell their kids, I saw this game. I think that's a big deal. I think back to something different about Michael Jordan doing his 2 3-peats in the 90s. You had to see it because you knew you were going to tell your kids about it.
Yeah. Do you subscribe to any Chiefs conspiracy theories? Do you think the NFL is helping them?
Okay, I'm a constant critic of officials on social media. But no, I do not. Ultimately, Patrick Mahomes was 8th in the league in drawing roughing the passer penalties, his rate. So Josh Allen, I always thought Josh Allen and the Bills get a ton of calls too. Now listen, it's 4th and 1. I think it was a first down in the AFC title game. I think it was a bad call, but I didn't think that reeked of some kind of conspiracy that the NFL wanted to get the Chiefs there. I think they kind of wanted Josh Allen in the Super Bowl, to be honest. I don't think they were going to be unhappy with either matchup. And it was a pile, and it's impossible to judge those piles. So, no, I don't see conspiracy. I don't think that over the course of this run, it's been because of that. Now, listen, the Eagles got screwed in the Super Bowl because of the pass interference, but he grabbed his jersey, and the official could see the jersey. What was he going to do? I think he had to call that. So I can't point to one thing that seemed fishy to me.
Earlier this week, Colin Cowherd, he said the Eagles might not even be able to break into the red zone against the Chiefs defense in the Super Bowl. So I want to ask, what are your thoughts on that take, first as an Eagles fan and then second as a sports radio host?
Oh, let me go in the opposite order. As a sports radio host, chef's kiss, because it made me so mad. And I'm like, I know Colin Cowherd's routine. How can he still make me mad? Not getting in the red zone. Does he know about Saquon Barkley? So my first reaction was as a listener. I basically, if I could have picked up the phone and called WIP in Philadelphia and yell at somebody, I would have. So masterful job by Colin. I actually have not seen I just don't get it. I don't understand. They have a quarterback who can run and a running back who's fantastic. The Chiefs just let up 29 points to the Buffalo Bills, who are quite conservative these days. But Bills don't even throw downfield. They let up 29 points. Eagles' offense is better than Buffalo's. Maybe Josh Allen's better than Jalen Hurts, but the Eagles have more ways to hit you. I honestly, I still don't get it. If I see Colin at the Super Bowl at Radio Row, I might punch him. No, I won't. But it was a good take by him. I just don't get it. I mean, there's just too many weapons on Philly. I don't see the game playing out like that at all.
Yeah, no, it seemed like something like Colin just kind of like saw the window to say something like that and knew it would potentially take off and he went for it. How do you craft a good take? Like, does it come naturally? Do you have to put a lot of thought into it?
So my hot taking days go back to Sports Illustrated, the late 2000s before Twitter started. And I was the NFL editor at SportsIllustrated.com. So I edited Peter King and Dr. Z and Don, the late Don Banks. It was an incredible job. I mean, just working with Peter was such an experience. But occasionally I would write these side columns. And I wrote this one column that went up on SI.com. I made the argument that Tom Brady was overrated. It was early in the Brady stage. You know, he had those 3 Super Bowls where he was good, but not quite Tom Brady yet. Turned out it was wrong. My coworkers for years and years and years reminded me of that. And you know, Sports Illustrated's Jimmy Traina, the great media writer, dear friend. I also had this take that LaDainian Tomlinson, all he does is run 8 yards and fall down. Because you know when you're playing Madden, the function where the runner can just go down, Tomlinson would always take that extra 2 yards instead of trying to hit the home run. Jimmy created a website called 8 Yards and Fall Down, tracking what he called bad takes, what I call brilliant takes. So I've always actually genuinely leaned towards a contrarian. And that's sort of how my mind works. If everybody's saying one thing, try to go the opposite way. I just recently did this take on why the Chiefs are likable because, you know, I genuinely believe that when the crowd goes one way, most often there's something wrong about that. And this is not like, I don't really do these things sometimes when I'm having a hot take. Let's call it a hot take on the show. I try and keep it genuine and authentic. And trust me, I'm doing it behind the scenes too and annoying people.
What is the most important part of a take? Like, does it have to be genuine? Does it, do you have to make sure that nobody else had it first?
But that's important. Not having anyone have it. I had a former boss. I don't know if you know Spike Eskin. He left us to go to Philadelphia and become a host. He had a podcast called Art of the Take.
Art of the Take. Yep.
Awesome. He thinks the key to having any hot take or a take that will get reaction, it's got to have a lot of truth to it. It basically, if it's not based in reality, nobody's going to care. So he's like, the quote unquote worst takes are only bad because everyone secretly knows there's something true in it. So I would say that is the most important part. I'm going to talk about my co-host again, Maggie Gray.
Yeah.
Early on in the show, when we started doing the show together at CBS Sports Radio, then she offhandedly said, it was like, oh, the Cowboys will find a lineman. I mean, what does an offensive lineman do? Just push people around. It got her in so much trouble. Mark Schlereth was like calling the station. But at the end of the day, why did that hot take cause so much trouble? Because, there's some truth to it. We all kind of think that's what offensive linemen do, is push people around. So I think having a kernel of truth is the most important thing to the quote-unquote art of the take.
Did you always feel that way, or was that something that Spike kind of instilled?
Oh, no, I always do it intuitively. Spike really laid it out. And, you know, Spike, I think, respected, for example, you said Colin Cowherd's take there. Like, I think no one would care if secretly we didn't think, oh, he might be right. Maybe they're not going to do anything against Steve Spagnuolo. It's one thing to score 55 on the Commanders. Steve Spagnuolo, defense coordinator of the Chiefs, is on a heater. So I think I would really start with like trying to be authentic. I don't think just making up a take for the sake of a take usually works. I think that the audience can tell the difference.
Do you have a take that you're most proud of?
Oh, take that I'm most proud of. Gosh, I might have to come back to that at the end of the podcast. I know a couple that I'm most infamous for. There's one take that I get killed for the most, and it's a random one. You know how this works. I don't know if it was 2010, the Carolina Panthers draft Luke Kuechly with the number 10 pick, I believe. I tweet, drafting an inside linebacker in the draft, that never, ever works out. So stupid Fred Siegel and Old Takes Exposed leads off every draft year for the next 10 years with that take. So that was my worst take. My best take. God, this should be easier because I have a million of them. Come back to me. I'm going to wrap up the podcast with one of my great takes.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny. Like I always thought of you as sort of a bizarro world Stu Gatz. Like you give unique takes, but you were thought of as a smart person giving those takes with Dan Patrick, whereas Stu Gatz kind of plays the dumb character giving those takes for Le Batard.
Oh my God. And I'm good buddies with Stu Gatz, who is secretly, if you talk to him, really, really smart.
Yes.
But funnily enough,
I've interviewed him a couple of times.
Yeah. And like he has really great insights. Yeah. He actually sat down with me recently and shared his thoughts on Sports Talk Radio. Brilliant. But you're right. The McLovin, Stu Gatz, I always thought there was a connection there, but I was the Ivy Leaguer. Yeah. But the truth is, I don't teach you anything in the Ivy League on how to analyze football. That means nothing. That means absolutely nothing. So I'm an idiot just like everybody else.
How was working with Spike Eskin?
Spike was great. So Spike had a connection to me because I'm from outside of Philly, Lower Merion. He's from Philadelphia. So what happened when I was leaving the Dan Patrick show, I actually knew Maggie, who was my co-host, really well through Sports Illustrated. But Spike and I immediately connected by breaking down the Sixers. It was supposed to be a job interview turned into a half-hour discussion about Tyrese Maxey. And I would say he's a very genuine guy. We're talking about genuine. You're not really getting a lot of artifice with Spike. And I think that comes through. And I think that's why people respond to him. People love working for Spike. He's a Philadelphia guy who came into New York at WFAN. And you would think that'd be a tough assignment. But I think everybody really responded to him. He's great on air. If what you see, he's one of those people on air. What you see on air is what you get behind the scenes. So it was easy to get along with.
How did you end up at CBS Sports Radio, now Infinity Sports Network? Like, were you poached, or did you reach out to them? How did that conversation start?
I guess I was technically poached. There's a couple of like real personal life things that happened. Maggie Gray and I worked at Sports Illustrated together. She used to be the video presenter at Sports Illustrated. And when I was writing, I would come on with her. We got a great rapport. She was at WFAN. She got a big job where she took over for Mike Francesa. Francesa came back. They switched around their lineup, and she wasn't thrilled with her new spot. And so she talked to the people at Odyssey, which owns both then CBS Sports Radio and WFAN, and said, maybe I want to go to national instead of New York local. Then they needed a co-host, but she wanted to do a co-host. She called me up. The only downside with Dan Patrick show, there was one major downside. It's in Milford, Connecticut, and I live in Brooklyn, New York. It was great. After the pandemic, everyone in New York had a car. It was taking me 2 hours to commute to work. So that was really putting a lot of pressure on me personally. It was a giant problem. I loved being at the Dan Patrick show. There's no way I was looking around. But just as it was becoming very problematic to commute, and we couldn't move for my wife's job, Maggie came along. So poached isn't really the word I would use, but that opportunity came up and it kind of fit where I was with my life. I think if I had approached Dan and said, can I do some kind of hybrid? He definitely would have done that. He was always really easy to work for, but my role in Dan Patrick show, I had to be there. So I didn't have any other solution to how to deal with the commuting. Like Dan and the guy always say, I don't understand how you do it, Perloff. How do you drive 2 hours? It was a great job. That's how I did it, but it was becoming too much. So it worked out. It was just one of those fate things where Maggie called me up and my contract was coming up and Dan was really gracious about it. So it was time to move on.
You were doing that commute the entire time?
Yeah. Well, no, I started with Dan and I was at Sports Illustrated. I actually did the show from the New York City office of Sports Illustrated via remote. And then the radio show went on DirecTV. I don't know if you remember when Dan in many ways invented radio on TV. It was the first show to ever do it at really high level. So he said, hey, you know what, Andrew, why don't you jump in that Honda Accord and drive up here every day? I know it's a lot, but it will add a lot if you're here. And through the years, my original role was to run the website and to help Dan edit his Sports Illustrated column. Then I just evolved into on air. And once that started, I had to be there in person. So I did that drive for 11 years. I know every exit on the BQE, the infernal BQE, Brooklyn Queens Expressway.
So how long was it when you started with Dan and then you started to get on air?
Okay, so Dan left
Like
ESPN.
did that take years or was it
2 years? 2
2
years.
years?
So Dan left ESPN in 2007. I don't know if you were in the business then, but remember Rick Riley said he was going to be the Shelley Long of the sports media world, the worst move ever to leave ESPN. But he signed immediately with Sports Illustrated. I immediately got hooked up with him and was doing things that were outside of his radio show. Dan, when he started the radio show outside of ESPN, didn't have the Danettes. It was just Dan for the first couple months. And then he started incorporating Paulie and Seton and Todd. And then I came on the tail end of them. So by the time I was there, they were established as on-air voices. I really started coming up every day when it switched to TV, because obviously I was the matinee idol of the show.
Was it by design that everybody started to kind of develop a role? Like, was that I know Dan has talked about wanting to kind of follow the Howard Stern model of building personalities and making everybody part of the show. But was it like by design that it happened slowly, or did it just kind of was it a natural progression? Do you even know the answer to that?
I don't really know, because it started before I got there. I think that Dan, I think, enjoyed it more when he could talk to somebody in front of him. For me, it was very intentional. We were in Arizona at a Super Bowl. I think it was Arizona. And Dan took me out to dinner. He's like, here's exactly how you were going to do. He told me, I want you to be a sniper. I want you to come in, and the less you say, the more the fans are going to appreciate you. He said, don't try to talk for the sake of talking. I'll carry all that. Just come in and just be in and out. And I think it'll be really effective. He actually, he had a really good mind of how this could work. Then it caught on. I think then it caught a little bit of fire. I'll just tell a story. When the Danettes became something more than just the producers, we were doing this show. We had no idea. Like, we were just having a good time. We were stuck in Milford, Connecticut. And one day we turn on game day, and there are all these signs about free McLovin, get McLovin a bigger desk, stop being a perv, Fritzy. So we were on at that time. At first, it was Fox Sports, regional networks, and DirecTV, and then eventually NBC Sports. But the Danettes evolved. I don't think Dan ever really thought the Danettes would be this troupe that they were. He was just sort of focusing on the show. But he did, for me, intentionally. He told me exactly how to chime in. So that was his design, not mine. Because I don't have a radio background. My background was print. So
So what was your comfort level at that point when he mentioned it to you?
I'd done a lot of interviews, and I think the way he designed it was good. If he had asked me to host when he was out or anything, I never would have done it. I had to learn a lot on the fly. This is also before everyone had a podcast. So I think a lot of writers were not as comfortable on air and didn't get to do long form podcast interviews. So I was nervous, but I knew Dan with such a big presence on air, it was a lot easier. If I was fumbling for what to say, he could just take the mic back, and it was no
problem. Did Dan ever interview Howard Stern? Did he ever go on the show? Do you know?
I know he never came on the Dan Patrick Show, as far as I know. I think Dan went. Howard had a landmark birthday, and Dan was invited and was there. Dan has talked to Howard Stern, but he, as far as I know, I don't think he's been on Howard Stern, and I don't think he's had Howard Stern on. I know they have talked, though.
Spike interviewed Howard Stern.
Yeah, I know. It's one of his early claims to fame.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, back when YSP was flipping from being a rock station to WIP. How was getting to know Adam Sandler?
Oh, the best. He is the nicest person. So generous. It is and Dan is generous too, because Dan didn't have to include us in that. But it just became, once we were on the first movie, it was the first movie that he brought Danette in. That's my boy. It was just like, oh, you're part of the crew. I got to tell you, you see him on TV, he looks like a nice guy, even nicer off camera. One time we walked into his trailer, and he's like, hey, he called me McLovin, can I get you an omelet or something? He's like, he would have walked to the commissary. He's ridiculously nice. That's my experience of him. Maybe it's an act, but I don't think so. Every time I've been around him, nothing but class. He doesn't put on a single air. It's almost incapable of it. You know how he wears those baggy shorts? That says all you need to know about him.
What movies did you do?
That's My Boy. I held a boom mic, and I acted across from Susan Sarandon. I wasn't really allowed to make eye contact. It was not said explicitly. So that was great. So it was Andy Samberg and Adam Sandler. We had a brief cameo in the movie Pixels, which I think is running on Netflix now, where video game creatures come to life and eat things. We were in the White House press corps. Seton and Todd got in the front row, and me and Paulie were stuck in the back. So you had to freeze frame to see me. So our big role, of course, was That's My Boy. No, not That's My Boy. The Week Up. It's Chris Rock's daughter marries Adam Sandler's daughter. Netflix movie. We had this huge scene planned. Robert Smigel, the comedic legend, is directing. It's going to be great. It rains. So our plan is basically totally ruined. At the end of the day, Robert Smigel comes up and goes, all right, boys, here's what you're going to do. You're going to walk across the parking lot, and we're going to have a drone that flies over you, then focuses on Sandler. So we're in the scene, maybe 1 second. We're just 4 guys walking across the parking lot. The only movie I get consistent residual checks from, The Week Of, for walking across the parking lot. I have no idea why. So, and then I did Hustle. I actually got a line in Hustle. I played reporter number 2. Got to interview Bo Cruz, the star of it, and said, you want to hear my line? Bo Cruz, how does it feel to go to the NBA draft scouting combine? I already forgot the line. That's it.
Great.
And Bo Cruz goes, I'm going to the combine. And I go, you are now. Yeah, that's my big line. And I can't act. And Sandler became quickly aware of that on set and had to pull me aside and said, Andrew, just act like you do on the show. It's no big deal. Just relax. And that was fun.
Was Dan supportive of you leaving the show for CBS Sports Network?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you the scene. I went back to his office and told him, and he immediately goes, okay, now tell me exactly what you do around here, Andrew, because I got to figure out how to replace it. And he pulls out a bunch. It's like, oh yeah, I'm happy for you. But when you do this thing, I'm going to have this guy do this. They're at the very, what's the problem right in front of me? How can I solve it? But he was incredibly supportive and incredibly nice. He totally understood about the commuting thing.
Yeah.
And he's been nice ever since. I would say, I can't remember one thing he said to me that wasn't supportive in that time. Because I was terrified because Dan did a lot for me career-wise. So I felt guilty or something, but I don't think he wanted me to feel that way.
What kind of boss was he?
Dan, almost perfect. He was pretty supportive of anything you wanted to do. He was demanding, though. Like Dan, I think think about where he came from, Sports Center, where everything is like, it's got to be done perfectly or what's going out on air is going to suck. So basically, I knew from day one, because I saw Paulie and Seton do it, and Todd as well, like, you got to be on time. Like, Dan cannot turn on his mic and not know what's going on. So it was demanding from day one. But the thing is, you kind of knew that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't stressful. He was also sometimes totally ridiculous. Like, you'd be sitting on the phone, like with a vendor or talking about something, and you'd hear a guy walking in the background singing some pop song, but adding curse words throughout it. He's totally ridiculous off camera. I don't know if you know that. Like, he is R-rated, quite immature in the best possible way, but he's not the Dan Patrick. So I was like, I learned that pretty soon on. He cursed out Todd in a really funny way, not in a mean way. The first day I was there, I was like, wait, that's Dan Patrick? He said the F word. But he's super fun. I learned a lot from him being a boss. Like, you really, like, I think sometimes it's lost, like, the level, because the way technology is, you don't have to be perfect. You can cover up for a lot of things. He wrote his own Sports Center and had to go on air in an hour. And that level of producing at that, he brought a lot of that. So even though he had his own man cave in Milford, Connecticut, like, there was still that, like, man, we're going to be super professional thing that Dan always had. So I think in that way, he was like kind of the best possible boss.
Yeah. He always seems like he's in control. Like, he seems like he's at least his on air presence seems like he's tough to rattle, which I think is a great trait.
Yeah. I mean, he can get emotional, but not like emotional about if you talk about his family or if you talk about Jerry West or somebody, like, he's relatable, that tough to rattle. Like, You mean if something starts to go wrong, like the teleprompter went down? Yeah, but that's because he came up on he came up from CNN Sports and ESPN in the early days of sports cable, where it was chaos. So he knew how to operate on the fly. What he does now with the radio, he's also like, he makes it look so easy. He's one of those people. It's like, oh my God, how did you just do that 10-minute open? It would have taken me a week and a half to practice that, but he can kill it. Kind of a natural too.
Was there ever a moment that you saw him get rattled on air, like whether it was a guest or a topic, like something like, oh, this isn't how we expected this one to go?
Well, they're funny now. I mean, there's a couple like famously bad interviews. I don't know if you remember the Matt Harvey interview, the Mets pitcher who said, "I'm only here to honor Qualcomm," and wouldn't answer any questions about his injury. But he was pretty good at turning those into funny moments. I got to tell you, there's one area where you can rattle him, and there's one call in particular that rattled him. A guy called in and said, "You don't know Green Day," and Dan is a former radio DJ. I could tell he was rattled. Like, he said, "All right, thanks for the call," and then he kept coming back to it. And then 3 years later, went to the Cleveland Rock and Roll Hall of Fame just to study Green Day. Like, rock music, like testing his rock music. Sports, he's fine. You test his rock music knowledge, that will get to him. I'm actually not joking. If you have him on here, do not say that he doesn't know something about music, because he'll totally bury you. As far as like technical stuff, again, I think because of what he went through, and Paulie too, and Seton, like, Bristol prepares you for that kind of stuff. Like, it was not easy to rattle him. And also, Dan was very, very demanding on the technical people in our building. Like, he's like, listen, I can screw up a fact, I can screw up anything, but I want everything buttoned down before I go on air. So he was pretty good doing the pre-work. Demanding, like, I don't mean in like an unfair way. Like, he's like, you better have this tight. Like, sure. Super Bowl week is coming up. You should see, like, he and all the guys, like, I was like, oh, it's Super Bowl week. We'll just show up and turn on the mics to be good. Like, they would rehearse for 4 hours on Sunday before the Monday. I'm like, dudes, what are we doing? It works. And they're like, nah, we've been here before. Let's do it some more.
Dan has, I think, less than 3 years now before he retires. Can you envision yourself succeeding him, or is that something like, should somebody succeed Dan, or should everybody just go their own way and let an entirely new show replace him when he does eventually stop?
Yeah, I don't think it wouldn't make sense for me or one of the guys to succeed him, because of the dynamic. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Also, too, I don't think I could do what Dan Patrick does exactly. Obviously, I don't think he should retire in 3 years. I think he still totally has his fastball. I was watching an interview he did the other day. I don't know. I'm not sure I believe it, to be honest. Maybe he reforms what he's doing. I just don't see it. I listened to the show. There's just no why would he retire? It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not just saying that as a bit. Like, I'm not positive it's going to be over in 3 years.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's anybody that listens to that show that thinks it should or needs to end anytime soon. And I would imagine he could, if he did want to cut back, work whether it's 3 or 4 days a week. Like, I'm sure,
like Stern,
right? Have a more Stern-like schedule. And
I could see that
sign for that.
I know he did joke with the guys on the air. He's like, "What if Nick Wright stepped in here? Would you guys want to work with Nick?" And it's funny. I don't remember what the guy said, but it felt like a jarring thing. Can you imagine the Danettes with another person? It just feels weird. Like, unless the person was like Dan Hicks, then maybe.
Yeah. How is dealing with bosses and radio executives as a host compared to when you were a producer?
Oh my God, it was totally. Turned out Dan shielded me from everything corporate going on. I work with nice people, so it's never ever been a problem. But what the questions they ask you are totally different. I always the brass that was at DirecTV at the time were like, we would sit down and be like, all right, how can we help the show be the best? How can we help Dan be the best? Now the dynamic's a little different. You kind of have to answer for things like, hey, I'm going to need you to do this to please this client or something. Or I'm going to need you to do this. You're going to have to try this read. There's no money in it right now, but we think this could be. So it's definitely like a different set of demands. I've been pretty lucky because I immediately clicked with Spike. My next boss is Ryan Hurley, who used to be in ESPN New York
Yeah.
Radio. He's a great guy. So, and Nebraska is really nice. Odyssey, who runs our company, it's a Philadelphia company, so therefore high quality, like myself. It's been pretty easy, but it's definitely a different kind of demands. I guess you could technically call me a producer on the Dan Patrick Show. They ask hosts and they treat them differently. There's way more pressure as far as delivering on the hosts, because I think at the end of the day, like once you're out there on air without a safety net, that is just more pressure.
You and Maggie are going to the Super Bowl?
Yeah, we'll be in New Orleans.
Radio Row?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Is it important? Is it still important for a radio show to be on Radio Row?
Well, for us, because we're not local, we're national, it is. I mean, we have to sort of connect with everybody in the national sports scene. I think it's a good thing too. Like in the 100-something markets we go to, I think I understand people say, "Oh, I don't want to hear from Radio Row," but I think it's a cool slice of life. Also, too, you get access to interviews that you're not going to get during the year. So that is important too. You form relationships. I think for a radio show too, you get contacts. So, you never know. Say we have a great interview with Justin Jefferson, either get his number or his agent's number, and they remember that. So it's definitely like it builds over the years. And every year you form more relationships and get you a guest in July, or say somebody's doing a media tour. Like, oh yeah, I met those guys at the Super Bowl. They were cool. I'll do that show. Very, very important. I would say it's one of the most important things. Yeah.
Definitely get it from like a networking perspective as a radio show and host. But I think as a listener, I don't know that it really serves the listener anymore.
I've heard that other places, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Last year, we had Emmitt Smith on, random interview, right? Emmitt Smith. And he spent 6 minutes eviscerating the Cowboys front office. I think that's interesting as a listener, and you're not going to get that if he's not in person. You're never going to get that on Zoom. So if he's not in person at the Super Bowl. So I do think there's extra going on here. And one more thing that I learned from Dan, it's also social media. Like we will be down, and we already have 3 crazy things planned. And Maggie and I, to our credit, I mean, not to toot our own horn, like we try to get after the show, we get out of Radio Row. Like last year, we officiated a wedding in Las Vegas. This year, we already have some stuff lined up that may or may not be life-threatening. So I think because like, listen, every radio show is a social media thing too. So I think just to mix it up and add layers to what you're doing, I do think it is important.
How do you get a guest who might be doing 10 radio shows and interviews in a day to say something unique on your show?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to.
Does it feel like a challenge? Like, is it?
Oh yeah. You got to hit him with a weird one immediately, almost immediately. You got to try. I mean, we insert pop culture almost. No, I mean, like, listen, they've done so many football interviews. At that point, they're so eager to talk about anything besides football. So we'll do 4 minutes of pop culture, 4 minutes of what's happening around them. This year it's going to be Kendrick Lamar versus Drake. You have to do that, and then you try and get in the hard question. Hey, you fired your coach. What do you think is going to happen in Minnesota or whatever next year? So that's the only way to do it, in my opinion.
Yeah, you mentioned the Emmitt Smith one. I will say, I think was it 2 years ago, the Joe Montana. You guys had, I think you had Joe Montana the same day that there was an article written about him that he wasn't that Brady had passed him by. And then like you guys actually had Montana that day. You asked him about it. And I remember that being a pretty newsworthy interview as well. So
yeah, that was good timing
for that one.
I do find, by the way, Brandon, that retired players are more honest. You never know what you're going to get. Current players are more cautious. You will get stuff. And you know what the best Super Bowl bit ever was? You probably know this, was Dan reading the scouting reports to players who were drafted later. It's one of my favorite bits of all time, because we're going to New Orleans and Drew Brees will be there. He's coming on our show, but Drew Brees getting so mad because Dan was reading some negative scouting report from the internet from 2001 or something. That was one of my favorite Super Bowl differentiators. And Dan, I think he still does that, but that, to me, that's cool. Like, it is a challenge to be unique.
I'm surprised that Breeze is going. I guess it's in New Orleans, so he kind of
No,
has to.
he's not just going. Like he's hosting. He was on Adam Schefter's podcast this week. Like he's playing a big role.
Yeah. No, it more so just like I know, like obviously I just said Joe Montana was there a couple of years ago. Emmett Smith is there, but like I don't know. I can't imagine Tom Brady ever being there, or 15 years from now Patrick Mahomes being there. Like I think
Oh, I don't know.
really I think they're
yeah.
like the players they're getting they're so much bigger now that when like the current players are retired, that it's almost going to fade, that it's not they're not going to want to have to do that kind of carousel and walk around and do all those shows.
Well, you obviously get the Dan Marinos, the Joe Montanas, Jim Kelly's, like that generation does that. I see. So you're saying Brady's generation now Mahomes, I remember in Minnesota, I guess he was a young player. Mahomes did Radio Row. You're right, he hasn't done it since, but he's playing most of the time.
He's always there. Yeah.
But Josh Allen does Radio Row now. He did it last year.
Yeah.
And he's pretty huge.
Yeah.
So I think in 10
maybe
years,
it'll stick around then.
Yeah, and also give it time. In 10 years, Tom Brady's not going to be that hot. Or maybe Brady will. Maybe Brady's an exception, but they're going to be selling. There's money here. I mean, after you're done playing football, it ain't that easy to make money.
Yeah. How did Dan Patrick like being at Radio Row? Because I would imagine that he's probably getting just like he's there and just gets nonstop requests.
He doesn't do Radio Row. He's always offsite.
Always? I know last year in Vegas, he was offsite. So you were
always.
Yeah.
Yeah, always.
I mean, that would be tough. That would be tough for him to be there.
It gets mobbed. Everyone's like, come over here and do this interview. No, he can't do it. He visited Radio Row last year. I actually like Radio Row more just because for a show like mine that doesn't have as many stations, like it is important to be as easy as possible for the guests to get to. So that's important. And it's just easier to just see everyone and talk to everyone there. But Dan has no interest. I can't think of one time he's ever been on Radio Row. He might have done it back at the ESPN radio days, but he vowed he will never do that again. There are very few shows like that, though, like that build original Super Bowl sets. I think you need a budget and creativity. That's just not a thing that I think you're going to see a ton of.
Yeah. How much of your, we talked about like the control that Dan had over the show and just wanting everything to be perfect. How much of your show, not on Radio Row, just in general, like how much of it now is kind of planned out or outlined before the show? How much of it is just kind of free flowing? Let's see where the conversation takes us.
We happen to be detail oriented. So we're 6 to 10 Eastern. We have a 7 o'clock call every night that sometimes lasts about an hour where we write a real rundown. So it's not only with a 2-person show, it's not just, hey, what's the topic, but hey, what's the take? And at least some points, like you have to come in on different sides or it's not going to be interesting. Not every debate. We can certainly agree, but we got to find things that are going to lead to discussion. If we're both like, oh my gosh, Nick Sirianni is a terrible coach, there's only so long we can talk about that. We might be like Maggie and I disagree on how good Jalen Hurts is. So that's like, okay, why don't we put that at this spot and try and do that? And also there's a lot of, listen, we want to speak to our affiliates as well. Like we know which teams play. We very much know which teams play and which you're going to get. You can see it in the phone calls. And we use that as a guide. Like people want to talk about the Cowboys. People want to talk about the Raiders. They're very popular. People want to talk about, for our market, we're syndicated. We don't get a lot of New York calls because that's so local. So we might not do as much Jets. So there's a lot that goes into it. We are pretty planned out.
Do you and Maggie find that you naturally are on opposite ends of a take?
Yes. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly why. I think she's a Bills fan. I'm an Eagles fan. We view things very differently. I guess I'm not sure how to exactly describe the thing. Like she likes certain kinds of styles of athletes. She's a little, and I like different kinds of styles of athletes. Like she basically grew up in the Belichick era and thinks like the Patriots are the gold standard, where I'm more of the Michael Jordan. I mean, the big one, like she's LeBron James, I'm Michael Jordan. and everything that permeates throughout that. So that's really the main debate in all of sports. And I can't stand the LeBron side, and she can't stand the Jordan side. So it's very easy. I guess that would be a generational thing too. LeBron was in her wheelhouse, Jordan was in my wheelhouse. So yeah, it's really easy. And the fact that we have very different teams too. She likes mostly New York teams. I hate the New York teams. So there's actually not that much we agree on.
How do you measure success of a national radio show? Like, are you looking at ratings in specific markets?
No, we are not ratings driven. We could get access to that, but it's just too varied, the markets. Yeah. It doesn't really make any sense as a whole picture. The best way to do it is to look at social media numbers and YouTube numbers. Like one year we put we have targeted YouTube numbers. That's really the best way we have to measure, other than anecdotally, hey, this affiliate likes us, that affiliate likes us. Really, as far as numbers go, social media is the best place for us to go.
So are you ever concerned about what affiliates you're in? Like when you're planning out a show, are you paying attention to where you are terrestrially, or are you just kind of going based off of the topics that you think are going to play most nationally?
No, we will book guests according to our location. Like for example, if we know we're in Boise, Idaho is a big one. So we'll talk about Ashton. Maybe I should admit this. We will play to our affiliates, and we'll use sound from our affiliates. But not if they're boring to the rest of the country. Only when it's a topic. Here's the thing: we do a lot of NFL and college football, which we know that plays most nationally. We would never talk about a local baseball team because, in my opinion, most MLB topics are big in the city, but they're not big nationally. So we'll play local as long as we know it's a topic that plays, or if there's a big star that's involved.
Yeah. Is it strange being in New York, like having the show broadcast from New York, but not broadcast in New York? Like obviously everybody at this point can hear it online, can watch it on YouTube and stuff and follow along on social media, but just the fact that you're not actually on terrestrially in New York.
No, it's not strange at all. I mean, we're in an office, in our setup, we're right next to WFAN. So in the morning, Boomer Esiason and Gio are right next to us. There's a big New York vibe that we're dealing with. Honestly, it's a relief that we don't have to answer to New York. It is to be tethered to New York is a really hard thing, I think. And in fact, we kind of get the sense that a lot of our affiliates don't want to hear about New York. In fact, New York gets tons of coverage. We don't need it. It's a relief not to be on here, to be honest, because that New York tends to become its own thing. Like how the Yankees are and the Knicks. That I would not want to have to play that group at all, because New York fans can be pretty tough.
Have you ever hosted an FAN show?
No, I have not.
I've been asked to. Do you have any interest in doing local? Like I get the feeling that you and Maggie fit the national radio scene, and that you both enjoy being there. But there is almost like a history of CBS Sports radio hosts kind of going to CBS Sports Radio, now Infinity Sports Network, and almost like waiting for an FAN opening. Like Gio obviously started over on national. Tiki and Tierney were both national, kind of almost like, and every time I've ever talked to, same with Chris Carlin on ESPN radio, now he's local. Like I talk to them when they're national, and like they always say, no, I like being national. I'm not just waiting for local to open, and then a local spot opens and they make the jump.
Yeah, no, I'd be in a weird position because I'm really a Philly sports fan who lives in New York. So I would have to get them kind of like, there's guys who've done it. Carlin went back and forth from Philly to New York, and actually did an unbelievable job at it. So I know I could do it. I could definitely do the WFAN job. I have a lot of opinions on the Knicks, but I think for me, national is a better fit because I'm not in the city. I don't live in the city where I root for the teams. And that's important. We know it. I mean, especially in Boston, New York, Philly. So I think I could do a Philly show in my sleep because I grew up listening to Angelo. I know the Philly market really, really well. So that one we actually had a more natural fit, believe it or not.
When did you leave Philly or did you go from Philly to New York? Like where?
After college. I went to college in New Hampshire, and then in the late 90s moved to New York. So I've been here, like 27 years. So I've been here a long time. Obviously I know the New York market really, really well. but I think it's one of those things. If I did a WFAN, I would have to say disclaimer at the top.
Yeah.
It's interesting about it. I mean, I think Carlin's so talented to do both of them. At the end of the day, there are a lot of similarities between all the Northeastern fan bases.
Yeah.
They're kind of I grew up with a guy, Jody Mack.
Yep.
I don't know if you know Jody Mack. So he was big in Philly, and then he would do New York and Philly. Then he was interchangeable. There's one guy, Tony Bruno, who was really, I believe he was mostly a Philly guy, but then he seamlessly did San Francisco and was great. And he
did national.
And he did national. He really lent himself to local. So I don't know how I would be, but you're right. It's a different job, right? It's a different thing altogether.
But you grew up kind of listening to local sports radio?
Oh, big WIP. Called in. Yeah, I was all about that.
Were you a Dan Patrick listener before you?
I didn't get it. I couldn't get it, but I'd be in a rental car somewhere and Dan would come on and I'd be like, oh my God, this is so exciting. The show is so awesome. I was a huge Dan Patrick, Keith Overman SportsCenter fan. So I just couldn't get it. And there wasn't, when he was at ESPN, it wasn't that easy to listen to online. And the podcast thing hadn't started yet. So no, I was not a huge listener, but I loved every time I could get it. I would listen. I would eat it up.
And how did you end up actually working for Dan?
So again, he left ESPN. I was an employee of Sports Illustrated for the first 5 years. I was on Dan Patrick's show. My paycheck read Sports Illustrated.
Oh, okay.
Then and I was still doing a lot on the side for SI. And then something happened where basically it was clear I was doing more for Dan. So both parties said, hey, you know what, let's transition where Dan's company is going to pick up 70% of Perloff's paycheck and SI will do 30. And then SI just sort of changed and it became 100% Dan. So it was really all through SI.
All right, we'll finish up here with first a Super Bowl prediction, and then if you do have a favorite sports take, we'll take that.
I've been picking consistently against my Eagles, at least against the spread. So I believe in fate. No, I mean, I think it's going to be 29-26 Chiefs. I think it's going to be a close game, and Patrick Mahomes is going to find somebody in the flat for a 4-yard gain. There'll be a first down, and they'll kill the clock. I mean, how could anyone expect anything different to happen? I think the Eagles will give it a close game. That Colin Cowherd not getting the red zone, that's not happening. I think someone will eventually pop one. I think Jalen Carter is a huge factor, but I just think the Chiefs, they have like 8 guys that they're going to find throw to. Someone we didn't even expect. I don't expect Mahomes. Mahomes is limping last time in torch test. He is going to be good. So 29-26. I'll do my take of the year. The one take I had that went probably most viral was I write a column for Athlon Sports, and I wrote that I'm not going to listen to Bill Belichick because he shunned the media for 25 years. Why should we just accept him? And people really like that. People responded like, yeah, why are we listening to Bill Belichick? Why do we have to turn on the CW and listen to him? Did I follow up on that? No, of course not. I made up every word Bill Belichick said, and he was pretty good.
Yeah, and he was everywhere too. Like, it's one thing if he just was on one show, maybe you can avoid it. But like when he was doing like 5, 6, 7 shows, like how could you actually just follow through with that and avoid it?
I saw him be so mean to reporters in person. There was one. Did you know Damon Hack, the golf channel? He was reporting for Sports Illustrated, and I was in the room or something. He asked Bill Belichick a question. He goes, "All right, I answered that last week. Look at the transcript." And they're just like the most professional question. I was like, oh my God, this guy's such a jerk. Why don't we just sit here and listen to this? And now he's going to be in the media, but he actually was pretty good.
Yeah, it's funny because he was friendly with Joe Beningo, and maybe like once a year he used to call into WFAN and talk to Beningo, and it was very much like the personality that he was there is the personality that you see now on like Pat McAfee show and stuff. Like he was engaging, and it was always so weird for me as a Jets fan who like is used to seeing what he's like at press conferences and stuff to all of a sudden hear him calling into WFAN and be like so like chummy with Beningo.
I never heard that with Beningo. I've heard him with Glenn Ordway in Boston, the Big O, he's close friends with too. He was a little more cautious in Boston because he was speaking to his own fan base. But I would like to go back and hear Beningo. Man, coaches get in trouble with Beningo. Remember Salah was texting him from the golf course?
Yeah.
Joe gets guys in trouble.
Yeah, no, it's wild. All right, Andrew, you were great. Enjoyed the Super Bowl. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
That is Andrew Perloff. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.